2011, Jim Parrott, a retired librarian, founded the Grand River Rainbow Historical Society in order to preserve the history of the rainbow community in the Grand River region. In 2012, he teamed up with Melissa Skye, a local filmmaker, to conduct oral history interviews of community members who had made a significant contribution to the region. These are their stories.
When I grew up gay was illegal. In Canada, it was against the law to be gay. You could be punished, you could be put in prison, you could be fined. And then Pierre Trudeau came along and freed us, basically, in Canada, telling the people of the nation had no business in the bedrooms of Canadians. That was a pivotal point in my life, and that is also the year that Stonewall happened. And I was 18 in the summer of love, and I went, screw it, I'm gay, I'm coming out.
And then in the mainstream press, I heard a lot about homosexuality, and I think something even in church once. So I realized I'm bad, I'm sick, I must change. So I suppressed myself for many, many years, and then eventually made the decision to come out. I believe I was 19 at the time. So most of my teenage years, I was basically fighting nature, fighting hormonal instinct, etc. And it was the gay liberation movement that started the modern one in 1969, when I was 17, 18, that basically helped, that set an example that maybe I have something that I can share with other people that is socially acceptable, and maybe I can join the crusade for change, which I did. To be gay in the 70s was exciting. Because there was a lot of momentum there from the feminist movement. And when Stonewall happened in June of 1969, it was right after Judy Garland died, and everybody was full of energy, even energy with grieving, and it was sort of the whole hippie, love, peace generation. So it was definitely an offshoot of that, and I just considered myself a gay hippie at the time.
The women's movement, the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, was, if not always supportive, all the time there was always a place for lesbians inside that women's movement. I think that was, I think it's kind of natural that social movements go on each other's backs. I think the civil rights, women's movement, civil rights movement, the gay and lesbian movement, I think that we've all come out of some of these movements and some of those same principles. So I think in Canada, the women's movement was huge because it got those issues on the front page.
I became involved in the local community back in March of 1971. I moved to Kitchener-Waterloo in 1970, and I very much started to feel the lack of a gay community back in those days, and I was thinking of starting up a group. But on March 8th of 1971, some other people did it, and I joined. I came to the first meeting, and it was an amazing experience because there were over 100 people who showed up at the University of Waterloo. The group was then called Waterloo University's Gay Liberation Movement.
The old Gay Liberation office in the campus center.
So initially, campus organizations fared fairly well, and Kameny really became a figurehead for the gay movement in the United States after 1957, when he was fired as an astronomer working for the government. And he started the Mattachine Society in Washington. And when he came here, he just made so much sense. He really energized a number of people, so that the end result was that we now had people on campuses who were willing to stick their neck out and start an organization.
Yeah, GLOW did some dances, and I think that we had a Wednesday night meetings, which was a social discussion group on campus, just basically a safe place for people to meet. And at that time, I remember that people were always wary to come into the room, because in the big campus center, everyone could see you coming into the main hall, and then, you know, they'd see what room you were going to, and if it was labeled glow. It was a deal back then, so there didn't seem to be a lot of people coming out, but the few of us who came out were kind of brave, I guess. It felt like it anyway.
Glow at the University of Waterloo is the oldest continuously running rainbow organization in Canada.
And that is worth remembering and celebrating, and realizing that there's been a lot of people who've been working under what would now be seen as far worse situations than we're dealing with, who started all of this. And if we didn't have them, we'd be starting at square one.
Community dances. Oh, yes, 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 yes. In the 70s, mid-70s, I believe, and into the 80s, there was a group of guys in town, and unfortunately I don't know their names, but they would rent a community space and they would throw together a big gay party, and it was up to the gay people in town, word of mouth. There was no posters, there was no internet. It's long before the internet existed. So communication was very difficult. You had to know where to go, you had to know the underword codes for gay stuff. And one of the biggest euphemisms for gay was fraternity. Are you a part of the fraternity? Was a common question you would get. And if you went, huh, what are you talking about? You knew they weren't gay, and you would move on. Or a friend of Dorothy, that was very, very common. It was kind of tricky, but they were successful. They would sell out. There would be lineups to get in. Bridgeport Community Centre used to be the main one they would use because it was so far out the country, we'd never get hassled. Some of the other ones, you get the yahoos coming in with baseball bats and stuff, so we would stay inside and nobody would go outside for anything until they were gone.
Well, the Bridgeport dances really were a unifying aspect for people all over southern Ontario, because people would come from Hamilton because the dances were regular. We had them every second Friday.
Yeah. Here's the Bridgeport Community Centre that had dances for quite a few years. Huge dances, successful dances. And this is the old American Hotel. Had a gay bar in here as well.
There was hotels where you could go and feel comfortable. The Walper and the American were the two biggies for the men. The women I know used to go to the King Edward Hotel in Guelph. That was the place for the ladies to go. Depending on who was bartending at the Walper, they had a men's room on the first floor, and then there's a few steps and a little alcove. And the nights that certain guys were bartending, they would allow you to dance up there, which was pretty scary and pretty risky in KW, men dancing in an open bar. The American Hotel never got that forward, that relaxed with the gay clientele, but they still would serve us. Other bars just would refuse to serve you. If they thought somebody was gay and outrageously across the line, they would just kick you out and say, go away. And they had the right to do that, so. The first gay bar I went to was the Half and Half in the alleyway behind King. The Half and Half Club was the place to be for many, many years. It was late 70s, early 80s, and then it changed name to the Pink Zone. And then the facility closed because it was rather scummy. It was off an alleyway. It had a very dark entrance with a peephole. You had to be a member of the club, or you had to know a member of the club to get in. And all the secrecy was just cut down on gay bashing, because gay bashing was there was a lot of it in KW in the 60s and 70s. The place, you never left the bar on your own. You went out in groups down the alley. People keep an eye out was going on. So anyway, that moved up to where Club Ren is now, and then it became Club Renaissance with our wonderful ladies there, Cheryl and Fran. Big part of our community, huge part of our community, huge supporter of Pride.
The parties, the dances, the Robin's Nest, oh my gosh, that was such an incredible place, and my God, it was in many ways dreadful when it comes to music, and like you could dance to, hard rock and then country and then polka, and there would be gaps in the music, and the environment wasn't particularly, you were in a warehouse, it was like a barn dance. And people traveled from all over southern Ontario to go there. because it was just a place to be fun and have a good time and hang out and be silly doing the polka.
Okay, on a larger scale, I think some of the events that, at least for Ontario, happened in the mid-70s with the events around the John Damien case. And this was a situation where John Damien was a racing steward and lost his job simply because he was homosexual. Like Dr. Kameny, he didn't go away. And so there were enough organizations that had formed at that particular time, particularly in Toronto, that were able to give him assistance in his fight.
He lived in Windsor, or at least that's where his family is from, and he went back there when he got unemployable. Basically, he couldn't get a job in either racing. It was his whole life basically, and he couldn't get another job in that field. And eventually went bankrupt, and so it was pretty long, drawn out affair. But it really underscores the unbelievable opposition that existed in the government to dealing with the matter up until the mid-'80s. And it's kind of, when I look back now, I kind of shake my head and say, wow, it was that bad. There was a lot of homophobia on campus. I mean, the Guelph campus at that time was still really in the kind of Aggie, agricultural students. And we had major kind of confrontations of various types in terms of trying to get dances organized and having our posters and office trashed and things like that. It was not a pretty thing. But then there was good integration into the community gradually, so that really the UGHA, as it was called in early years. I remember going to the first meeting they held, and I was terrified. I got on the bus, and I thought everyone on the bus knows I'm going to this meeting. And I talked to so many others that were there, and they had the same kind of this just terror. Really, to me, terror, I know what it felt like, and I think every gay person, particularly in that generation, knew what terror meant, to be able to not even be able to walk down the street and feel like you're, safe. Later, eventually, I decided to, first of all, see whether the Ontarian wanted to publish it, and anonymously. I didn't want to put my actual name on it, fear of my life. So it was published, and it got good feedback, though it also got some hostile feedback. And then eventually, I think it was published in the Body Politic and in Out magazine, which was the gay media collective in Kitchener-Waterloo. So that, anyway, I hope it was helpful to people, because it kind of distilled my own kind of passion and angst at the time. But my dad reacted really negatively and said, find a psychiatrist, get electroshock therapy. He had all these prescriptions for, I had to deal with it in the army and all this kind of stuff. And I had been doing a lot of reading on my end and said, I've read about some of these treatments, and making me vomit on the picture of my lover is not my idea of a sound, scientifically based treatment. So anyway, so we had a kind of impasse for a while. But
Anita Bryant was Miss Runner-Up, or second runner-up for Miss America Beauty in 1960-something. She did have a talent. She was a singer, and the Florida Orange Juice Commission snapped her up to do television commercials marketing orange juice. I won't sing the jingle, I remember it specifically. And she even came up to Canada, and she said Canada's beautiful in the wintertime, but a little Florida orange juice will set things right. So she was quite right-wing. She was a member of an extreme right evangelical Christian group. And in Dade County, Florida, about 1977, she overturned one of the United States' first anti-gay legislation, and she vowed to take that campaign right across the United States. And she was even in Canada. She was invited by some Dutch Reformed church in North York or something. We picketed the church in the middle of the winter. So even in Canada, she spread her hatred. So we would call the radio station every time there was a commercial, global, CTV, or whatever, and I believe we succeeded in getting her off the air. Eventually she was let go from the Florida Citrus Commission.
Boycott Florida citrus. Keep Anita Bryant out of Canada.
The Leaping Lesbians radio show was born out of another gay show called Gay News and Views, and it was supposed to be men and women. Well, there was men and women when it started doing it together, but the women started to feel like they wanted to have something more focused on women, and so they started the Leaping Lesbians show. Now the name comes from a song by an artist named Meg Christian, who wrote it about as a response to Anita Bryant's campaign against homosexuals, and it was a threatening, "Here come the Leaping Lesbians, we're gonna get ya." And so the show generally had 2 programmers on at any one evening, and it ran on Thursdays from 6 till 8. And so you would just, well, the slogan was music by, for, and about women.
Yeah, it was very music oriented, but also an opportunity to pass on information about events, dances, things that would be of interest to lesbians in the community.
I do remember that there were 2 women who were living fairly far outside the community. Might have been Alora, might have been Fergus, I don't really remember, but they were very closeted. But every Thursday, they ran into Waterloo to do their grocery shopping, and they said they sat in the parking lot of the grocery store, listened to the show for 2 hours, and then ran around for the last hour that the grocery store was open to do their shopping. People thought it was very weird that they had to go all the way to Waterloo to get groceries, but that was their way of connecting with the community. I think there was a real historical point where things changed in the lesbian community, where there was suddenly something called women's music, women spelled with a Y. And it started out with a couple of albums that, The Changer and the Changed, one of them by Chris Williamson. That album went, you would call it went viral now. Everyone, lots and lots and lots of lesbians had that album, and tons of feminists had it. So there was this little dance that you would do. You met somebody, you'd talk with them, and maybe you were sitting drinking coffee at your house, and you'd put on the album, and if they knew it, well, there was a chance maybe that you could hook up with them, because maybe you are a lesbian, and there was this little code thing that you would do back and forth.
I remember going to different events and talking, and all of a sudden somebody who I didn't know would say, "Hey, I know you," and I'm like, "I don't know you. I recognize your voice. You're on the radio." And again a reminder that radio, which maybe is not as prolific right now, and not with the internet and podcasts, but back then it was a way to connect.
It was a very good experience for me to get involved with the radio show, the Gay Out. It wasn't called Out, it was Gay News and Views. And in fact, we did bring in some news from New York City. They were doing a radio show as well, and we purchased their tapes, their news. And at the time it was very important because AIDS was new, and they certainly had a lot of background information about that and what was happening in New York.
Unfortunately, most of the guys I knew back in the early 60s are either passed away or they live in Vancouver. There was a huge exodus out of Kitchener area in the mid-70s to Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And then unfortunately AIDS came and took a lot of my friends away. I had trouble with that, sorry. I lost it. We all lost a lot of dear friends.
It didn't affect me personally as much as people I knew in Toronto. I only lost 3 or 4 close friends. But in Toronto, they would lose that many a month. And I've heard stories back then that many young gay men in their 20s and 30s went to more funerals in a month than their parents had in the entire lifetime.
Well, AIDS started to have an impact in our community in the early 80s, and there was nothing here except for the gay community resources to deal with it. And so myself and a fellow who is bisexual and married actually undertook to try and get a committee started, and we did successfully do that. and that was formed in '87. The AIDS Committee of Guelph and Wellington County, and eventually got funded, and it's grown and still exists today. But the early years were pretty tough because of the number of individuals that were coming down with AIDS, and we were just losing them. In retrospect, it was like going through a war, basically, in terms of your own kind of circle, the number of friends that I lost, and just the uphill battle to get better understanding and more openness about the whole thing in the gay community, let alone in the broader community.
So it's a time still where if you were dying of AIDS, some people wouldn't come near you. They wouldn't touch you.
AIDS was a big part of gay people coming out because you could not hide the disease. You couldn't hide what was going on. The discrimination against gay people was hideous. Not letting them in the building because you might catch AIDS. Like, come on, people. That was not nice. So that's a huge, huge part of our freedom, unfortunately.
I think up until that time, there was the odd pockets of people that were trying to organize, trying to bring together the community and doing different things. But the need to come together to address that huge crisis that the mainstream was not interested in dealing with. The creation of the hospices, the creation of AIDS committees, the creation of community activism around AIDS, around, whether you know the person or not, they could be a fellow person, a brother, it could be anybody, and that you needed to stand up and do something to help. And I think it brought a lot of people together for a common cause that normally wouldn't have, who would have said, oh, I'm not into politics, or I'm not interested in committees or activism or things like that. But it touched so many people's lives that regardless of the situation, you were tended to be drawn to it.
House rates were important specifically in Toronto and in Canada, basically because they were an event almost on the scale of the War Measures Act in terms of action to arrest large numbers of people.
And that was, I think, a turning point for that community, and it had impact throughout Ontario, because at that particular point, nothing happened locally. You drove to Toronto. The police just were heavy-handed. They decided that this was a group of people that they could pick on, that didn't have a lot of support, and to them represented a type of behavior which was not necessarily compatible with the way in which they wanted their community to function.
And there's pictures out now that have, and there were pictures out then too, but where you see just how bad those raids were, and what damage was done, and how much violence was done, and like those places were physically destroyed. They weren't just raided, they were destroyed.
And basically the anger centered around that we had so little space in the culture, and the bathhouses had been one that had been there actually for quite a number of years. In fact, there was even a bathhouse in Guelph, believe it or not. When I first was going to school there, it was unbelievable. I never went there, but I know it was there. And so bathhouses in our small communities were, a point of contact that nothing else existed. There weren't bars, there weren't social clubs in an open kind of way.
A lot of people were in the bathhouses for sexual reasons, but a lot of people were there because it was a very, very cheap place to spend the night. I was a university student at the time, and so was my lover, and we would go to Toronto and we'd rent a room, not necessarily for the sex part of it, but to have a place to stay in Toronto after the clubs closed. So when they did the raids, they got a lot of innocent people caught up in this stuff, and they were taken to jail, and their names were published. People that were not out, it was devastating, because all of a sudden their families found out, and their boss found out, and they would get fired, and it was a horrible thing for the police to do. Horrible, horrible.
There's definitely a period in the 80s and 90s, and I'm sure well before, I can only speak from my knowledge, where, you know, people through for a variety of reasons, a lot of them about safety in their communities when there was no human rights, would choose to go to parks, or would choose to go to bathhouses, or would choose to go to bathrooms, public bathrooms, to meet people, sometimes, a lot of times for sex, but sometimes it was just, I think, to connect to another human being that felt that way too. So I think when there's no outlet for you to experience relationship with another human being that gets where you're coming from with your identity, or I think you will resort to some more desperate options. Whenever there was a raid, people's names ended up in the paper. That was one of the big punishment pieces. His names ended up in the paper. Everybody that was arrested, their name was published. And if you had an occupation that was considered in any way connected to children, any way connected to public service or vulnerable population, anything, and the description of that was huge. You know, it's like they would call your employer and let them know that you were arrested in this venue. And so when people's names were published, it wasn't uncommon to, in some of the follow-up reports of the arrests, that you would also hear about the suicides. And, you know, so, you know, a minister of a church was picked up in a raid and shot himself because he couldn't find a way out for himself, in the sense of his family, his wife, his congregation, his employment, like everything was taken from him that day. And, you know, regardless of your morality around whether they should have been here or should have been there, like, regardless, a human being was destroyed.
That was kind of the last straw in terms of the Toronto gay men's community, in terms of that was it. And it did cause riot. There was there was great reaction against the police actions, and then there were literally riots. Organization fundraising to support all the found-ins, as they call them.
I remember I was in an apartment on Yonge Street, and there was the bathhouse raids had happened, and that was a big deal. It was huge because it was big in the media. All this abuse had happened. People were really, really angry. Like, I mean, they were fighting mad. And, you know, before, people were, you know, keeping under the radar, going about business quietly. There was activism, obviously, but the bathhouse raids kind of blew it apart.
In my memory, the bathhouse raids were the first time the entire gay community came together as one and said, "Stop it! It's not fair. You're being nasty to us." Actually, their slogan was "No more shit," and we wore a pink button with a pink triangle, and it was an intense. There was cops all over the street. There was OPP. There was city cops, RCMP. Your name was taken down. They were taking pictures of everybody in the protest.
But I do remember the power and emotion of that time. It was really quite something.
So they handed you this button and a placard if you wanted one, and we just walked from bathhouse to bathhouse to bathhouse. And the cops were on the streets and people jeering and throwing things. But there was also gay people cheering us on. So I think that is probably one of the biggest focal points of the gay movement in Canada. It was reported coast to coast. It was shocking that all these gay people will go out and defy the police. And so it was a good time. You felt good if you were there. You felt afraid, but you felt very good too.
Yeah, one of the highlights of my coming out experience was right after the bathhouse raids in Toronto, where thousands of people gathered on Yonge Street, and it was pretty emotional as well. You know, we had just suffered the arrest of hundreds of people, the largest mass arrest in Canada since the War Measures Act. You know, incredible. But I remember Margaret Atwood was there, and and she stole the show as far as I'm concerned. She went up and I guess she played dumb in a sense. She wanted to know what the police had against people having a bath. She said she would be really upset if the police came barged into her bathroom. And she said, what do they have against cleanliness? You know, some moments like that you live with for the rest of your life. You're wonderful, beautiful moments.
I think one of the hardest decisions I made coming out was the day that a person who I was in the military with, the Naval Reserves, called me at home and said, I need to ask you a really important question, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer. And I was like, crap. This is dangerous. This is very dangerous. And so she said, I want to know, are you gay? And I hesitated. At that time, if you were in the military, even in the reserves, if they discovered you were gay, you were kicked out. And so for me to admit that and answer that question really put me at high risk. So I decided to jump, and I said yes, and then she invited me out to a bar. It was my first gay bar experience, which was a real eye-opener because, you know, I lived in a fairly sheltered suburban life, and I'd never even seen two people together, and to see two women kiss was like completely enthralling to the point that I stared rudely, I'm sure. But it was really, really interesting. But that was a sort of an invitation to a whole subculture in the military, that this hidden secret society. This happened in the late 80s. I was sitting outside one of the messes waiting for my friends because I lived at a different location on base, and this officer came up to me, female officer, without her name tag. And this is what caught my attention, because the name tag was like you could get into a lot of trouble by not wearing the name tag. And she said, do you know so-and-so and so-and-so? And I said, yes, I do. And she says, well, you don't know me, and I need for you to forget me. But they need to know that the Special Investigations Unit is investigating me. And so what that meant was the Special Investigations Unit were the group that investigated gay people, drugs, a lot of criminal activity, but they were one of their primary things was getting rid of the gay people. So then I was lucky in the sense that we were never brought into an interrogation room. I heard afterwards the stories of that, and I know that that was a very abusive, very horrible experience. I think probably the reason why is because it was ending the summer and we were going back to our home units, and they probably didn't feel that there was a purpose. But the word definitely got back to my home unit, because before that I had been a golden girl. I had gotten every rank increase. I had gotten awards, like things, really positive things had happened, and I was treated and viewed as like a really positive person, a really good military example, and had a lot of opportunities as a result. When I got back, the garbage started, the mistreatment started. It wasn't about whether or not I was always in the top third of all my training. It didn't matter that, you know, I had loyalty to the military. It didn't matter that I was well liked. It didn't matter that I was a good image. It didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter. At the end of the day, I was gay, and even they didn't even know that. I was thought to be gay, and that was enough. And then everything else didn't matter. And that's what I really came to realize, is nothing else mattered. And so that's a real attack on your worth as a human being. And I really am grateful that that has changed in the sense that they don't do it to that degree anymore. naive enough to believe that there isn't homophobia in the military, because there's homophobia everywhere. But they have to be a little more cagey about how they do it. They don't have to be so blatant. And so yeah, that was tough, because that had a lot of meaning for me, and that had a lot of reward on many levels. Before I realized I was gay, I did consider at one point going into the ministry. There was a period where I felt that that might be where I was meant to go. And so then I came out. So at that point in 1984, there was no churches that had any room for gay people.
We have two daughters. Our older daughter came out when she was halfway through her second year of university at Trent. We lived for a while with my younger daughter not knowing, because my older daughter was not keen for her to know, because she, although the United Church is very liberal, she was involved with camping, which tended to be more conservative. And one of my younger daughter's friends' family had left the United Church, which was currently, at that point, dealing with the issue of ordaining self-declared homosexuals, which was a big issue in the United Church at that point. So we lived for a number of years, I'm not sure how many, with just 3 out of 4 of us knowing, which felt impossible. It felt like we were having conversations at different levels, with each other sometimes. And finally, one night when my husband and I were out, she finally told my daughter, and I actually think it was a letdown for my older daughter, because I think my younger daughter had figured it out by that point, and probably wasn't exactly ho-hum about it, but was certainly accepting. And it actually radicalized my younger daughter in her life. We had been a long time in the congregation that we were a part of, that my husband worked in, and my daughter had been 5 when we moved there, so everybody knew her from a young age. But still, we were in the closet for a period of time there, until there were some people in the church who were wanting the congregation to look at becoming an affirming congregation, and my husband felt that he couldn't, in honesty, go through the church with that process without being out himself. So one Sunday he outed us, all of us. My daughter didn't come. She found that too challenging, I think. But my younger daughter was there, and her boyfriend or fiance. And that was mostly a good experience. There were some people that were upset, but the church went through the process and eventually became an affirming congregation.
I would say it was the late 80s. I made the decision to start a new group. It was called the Cambridge Kitchener-Waterloo Bisexual Liberation. We picked that name so the acronym would be Quibble, because we couldn't think of anything else cute. And the group started, as a lot of groups are starting at that time. In a way, it was unfortunate that these groups were starting, and they were starting because there was the constituency of out bisexuals was growing more and more. They were starting to march in pride events. There were books that came out. The book By Any Other Name was a huge watershed for a lot of these kind of groups starting, because it felt like we had a voice. The unfortunate aspect was a great deal of what conversations went on at these groups had to do with people dealing with really hostile reactions to their orientations from within the gay and lesbian community. The fairly universal experience was that the straight community were a lot easier on bisexuals than the gay and lesbian community. And as I said, I can appreciate to some extent for some people who did not see it as a legitimate option, to see it as sort of a cowardly way of trying to sort of be both things at once and please everyone. But for us, for whom this was a real lifelong part of who we were, there was a measure of frustration and alienation. I think the community has grown to include us, and you know, we now have this wonderful big long alphabet suit, and B is in there, and we're here to stay, and I'm glad about that.
WOODS stands for Women Out of Doors, and in the beginning that's exactly what we were. I think what we had was fun. We would go on hikes, Sunday afternoon hikes, and then come back to somebody's place for, you know, pumpkin pie or whatever. So we did that walk, you know, at St. Jacob's or along the mill race. We went to Elora Gorge. But we were out and about and doing things outdoors.
Yes, I think Woods played an important role in the community because it was a place for women to get together, and you know, there had been women's dances and women's discussion groups, but this was more of an outdoors format, so it was a chance to get out with like-minded women and just do some activities and meet people, because you know, before the internet and all that, you really had to get out to meet people.
The other thing I did for years was have crepes for breakfast on Christmas morning, because a dozen eggs and a couple of pounds of flour can feed hordes, and all you had to bring if you came was the filling and enough to share. So we never ran out of crepes and we never ran out of filling, and so I asked for people, asked for women who were alone on Christmas Day, and there are a lot of us, because if you're not out to your parents, then at Christmas time you're expected to go home, and oftentimes that left one behind. Anyway, people who were single by choice or whatever, they would come here for Christmas breakfast, and the first year I did it, I thought, you know, they'll show up around 8 or 9 in the morning, and they'll be gone by 1 or 2. I couldn't have been more wrong. This was their Christmas, and we just sat and talked, put a fire in the fireplace, and sat and talked for hours.
Many people, especially before a certain time frame, will talk about chosen families because they needed to have a new support system that they called family, because many didn't have family anymore, or it was very distant or cold or not accepting. So it really felt like family. So those moments when we captured that sense of family, that sense that you know, we were brothers and sisters together, and we did fabulous things together, and we had fun. And some of the drag shows, of course, you know, could be hilarious. You know, I've seen a lot of them over the years, so I don't tend to go to them anymore, but at the same time, they were so much fun and so fabulous, and just the different times that we gathered together as groups and did things and had fun. There was so much hardship in our lives on many different levels that those moments were just absolutely incredible. They were absolutely enriching. They filled us up again to face the world that didn't really always have a place for us.
One of the first things I did when I joined the committee was ask them where they were going to have the Tri-Pride event in Victoria Park, and they said by the clock tower. But the year before, it was very hot and there's no shade there, and they had not a big enough tent. So I went down to City Hall and moved us over to the island.
I liked for years when we were on the island. It had a nice it sort of felt like we were on a enchanted island, but we were sort of like in this special place. I remember one year we had this special ceremony at the beginning, which is actually a Unitarian inspired event. We had the declaration of a hate-free zone, and what we did is we got, like, it wasn't danger do not cross tape, but it was like this police tape, yellow and black tape. I've still got it. and we all carried it. We held it all the way around the edge of the island, and we had various things we said, and we just declared it a hate-free zone for the day. It sort of had this feel of a special spot.
The first time, I can't remember the exact year, but the first time that our Pride celebrations locally in Kitchener-Waterloo and our surrounding area were held on Rose Island in Victoria Park. I remember attending, and I think it was only my second Pride, I'm not sure. But I'll tell you, it was like amazing, because it was like there was so much going on, and I had the Voice magazine, we had a booth at the time and stuff, and all the entertainment. And again, it was this feeling like it was otherworldly. And it was the first time in my life I ever experienced anything like that, where people were, we had all these buttons on with all these sayings and things, and I lost myself totally. And it was like this incredible day I've never experienced ever before or since. And just feeling included and feeling normal and feeling totally accepted. And, and then at the end of the Pride celebration that day, when I got on my bike to ride home, I was going to cross the bridge and realized I still had these buttons and stuff on. And then when I realized I needed to take them off, I actually wept as I crossed the bridge, because the day of acceptance, and something I'd never felt so incredibly strong before as a lesbian, I knew it was over. I had to go back into the real world, and there was still quite a separation back then. But it was a fantastic Pride. But I just always remember that moment at the bridge and what it felt like crossing back over into the general area.
I'm going to start this bit about the Canada Pension battle because Jan's a little shy, but I know she'll take it on as soon as I get the facts wrong. Jan lived with her partner Gail, who was a secondary school teacher and an out secondary school teacher in the country, in rural Ontario, in the 1990s, early 1990s. An amazing woman. And she got sick with cancer, and she died in February 97. Jan and Gail had been together, I think at that point,
16 years.
16 years. And Jan was not entitled to Gail's teaching benefits, her pension through teaching, and she wasn't entitled to CPP benefits. Despite some of the earlier court cases that we had won at the Supreme Court level, they said no, she wasn't entitled. There was a major court battle, and the government backed off a bit, and they said, fine, we'll pay them from 1998 on. Gail died in February of 1997. So a law firm in Toronto started another Supreme Court challenge, and they looked for people to take this fight on, which meant that the people who took the fight on had to expose their emotional rawness over the deaths of their partners, and I don't know, almost like the humiliation of being denied legal recognition of their relationships. I mean, I know anger's a part of that, but it's also a way of making, I think, you feel like your relationship didn't matter.
Well, you had to go back and prove that you had this relationship for a number of years, and this class action suit. I mean, we had to haul out every little bit of information that, income tax forms, everything we had in order to prove our legitimate relationship. But the fact that we won was a huge step that they, I mean, the benefits weren't that much, but
it was the acknowledgement and the recognition and the validity of the relationships. It was like validating. These relationships were marriages. These relationships mattered. That they may have been between two women or two men, but the relationships were as serious and as committed and as deep as any heterosexual relationship. And they won this retroactivity in 2004, 5, I can't remember. So we're not talking all that long ago in queer history in Canada. None of the major major things that we have won are all that long ago. They're within a young lifetime.
I was part of an organization called Canadians for Equal Marriage, and we lobbied the government for equal marriage rights. And I remember vividly when it came through, when we actually won. I raced in my little car over to City Hall and I asked for a marriage license, and I was denied. And I argued with them that the law had just changed, etc., but they wouldn't give it to me, so I left. But by the time I got home, there was a message on my voicemail saying that they were indeed wrong and I could go get my marriage license. So that was really exciting. It was a huge victory for us in Canada. It was sort of funny because our local paper, and at that time I was living in Brantford, they decided to do a front page story on us, my partner and I, because we were one of the first same-sex couples in Ontario to be married. But the stupid thing was that they published both our address and the location of our wedding, which was a huge mistake. So we had to have a safety plan in place, both for our home and for our wedding. And that's, you know, not something most brides really have to worry about, is what to do if picketers show up at your wedding. But that was the time. I mean, we got lots of positive feedback, but there was negative feedback as well. I mean,
the biggest change in the community is when they pass the legislation to have same-sex marriage. I think that's the biggest step forward that I've seen in my lifetime. And my son got married last year to a very nice young man, and I'm very proud of both of them. They're doing very well.
The legalization of gay marriage. So that, I didn't really think going, hearing about it, that I thought, okay, whatever, it'd be nice if we could get married, and some people were not in the communities as well. Marriage is a patriarchal institution. We don't need it. And I didn't really think it would have, I thought it would be great to have, we should have it, it's an equal right, but I didn't really feel how it would affect me. But yet when it happened, all of a sudden I felt more open, like, okay, we're on par with everyone else. And, I just felt more powerful, more empowered in the general society, and there's my partner, and I got married. So then, it just makes you feel more equal. So, for the naysayers who didn't think it would matter, it makes a huge difference.
You have no idea how wonderful it is to find deep love in your 50s. When you think it's game over, the man of your dreams appears. Unfortunately, I only had 7 years with Peter and he passed away. But best 7 years of my life. Totally. And I have something that other people don't have, is I had a husband, and a loving husband who cared for me deeply. So the memories are phenomenal. Yeah, after Peter passed away this year, I filled out a form, and I do now get widow's allowance. That is something, if Pierre Trudeau had not changed the law as Justice Minister, and if the drag queens had not kicked up their heels in 1969, I would not be getting widow's allowance today. So you have to remember our history, you have to respect it, and you have to carry on.
In the past, a lot of LGBT people had children, but they had children from prior marriages. What happened in the late 90s, early 2000s was that there was this explosion in our childbearing that's been referred to as the baby boom. And I was a part of that. After my wife and I were married, we had a child. It was interesting for me to go through the experience of having a child because there was a lot of homophobia in all of the services that we accessed. Both at the fertility clinic, which is not set up for LGBT people, or certainly wasn't when I was accessing it in the early 2000s, wasn't particularly welcoming, but I mean did serve us, which is more than I can say for the midwife the first midwife that I tried to hire, who blatantly told us that she did not believe that lesbians should have children, and so she would not serve us. And we actually had to make a complaint with the Ontario College of Midwives against her. And we won. She had to undergo sensitivity training, but that was difficult.
Well, I think it started out where the letters were not just an acronym, but actually stood for the words, you know, parents and friends of lesbians and gays. And it started in the States in the early 70s in New York. And then the group here started in 1993, and PFLAG Canada officially started in 2003. And the official PFLAG Canada doesn't limit itself obviously to gays and lesbians, and doesn't limit itself just to parents and friends, but siblings and any family members. So in their statement of purpose, they say they're the only organization that deals with LGBTQ issues from a family point of view. That's their particular specialty. Well, there was a point in which most people coming to the PFLAG were trans and their families, and I'm not quite sure how they ended up with us, whether there was no other group around that they somehow felt comfortable, but we learned through them, really, through their experiences, some of them going through surgery, some of them not.
Visiting the hospitals.
We really learned a lot from them. So it seems, it felt like we were dealing with trans earlier just because of that than a lot of other groups and organizations. That's kind of an interesting experience when people now talk about that, and we realize how many years ago that was.
That was. In fact, we had a saying, trans is the new gay, when you can see what had happened with our meetings. Kitchener-Waterloo is still a really conservative area, and there are parents, even a generation or two younger than we are, that didn't have the education. And I think in Canada there's a middle class homophobia, if you want to use that term, that it's okay for somebody else to be gay, for somebody else's kids to be gay or queer, but not okay for my kid. And I think there's a lot of education along that line. I know one Thanksgiving dinner when my elder daughter said, "Mom, what was the biggest mistake you ever made as a parent?"
No.
I thought, oh my God.
Which
I
one?
know,
Which
I know,
one
I
would
know,
you like?
I know which one is the biggest that is affecting my life now. It's assuming that all my kids would be heterosexual. That's the one mistake that I made that probably caused more angst and in our family for Kate. Because you assume, at least my generation assumes that their kids will all be heterosexual. And that's a big mistake. But let's hope the next generation doesn't make that mistake.
Really I think about 10 years ago, I just started planning events because I wanted to see more fun in the city. And I was doing it just myself, bringing people together. And it wasn't until years later that I actually decided to get more serious about it and open my own events business called Secret Events. I think one of the very first events that I ever did was a Butch Femme dance. The entertainment there was mainly drag kings, and I think for many people who attended that dance, having primarily drag kings was a real treat because it wasn't something that was very common in our city about 10 years ago. But then because of that dance, more kings started coming out to Club Renaissance and performing there. And the stage was always just so welcoming at Club Ren, so anyone, complete amateur who's never done this before, could just take the stage. And Miss Drew was always just so happy to see new people come out.
I remember one of the hardest parts of being who I am as a female impersonator or drag queen was finding a partner, because a lot of people who knew I did drag assumed that I wanted to be trans or to be a woman, which isn't true at all. I look at myself as being an actor or an entertainer for a night. 4 or 5 hours, Miss Drew goes back in the closet and I'm Brad again. So that was kind of hard for a while. I've been lucky enough now to find a partner that accepts me for every aspect, which is great.
Mostly I learned how to do makeup. I went to Gina's School of Aesthetics. It was my first makeup course. And then when I started taking drag more seriously, I learnt from a lot of the queens in Toronto. And from there I took what I liked from each queen and made my own face. And I also worked for different organizations, or different businesses. Actually, one was MAC Cosmetics for a while. And ever since then I just kind of play and crash and burn and just try some different things out once in a while and hope for the best. I just kind of sat down with my mom and explained to her that, you know, this is something I've been doing and I'm making some money at it. Why don't you come and check out one of the shows? So her and a bunch of girlfriends came out to check out the show. And she's one of my biggest fans. She, in fact, there's a pride blanket that she crocheted that we auction off every year, in progressive auction off. We've been doing that for about 10 years. So every year after that person, or when we do our next fundraiser, they bring it back and we auction off to somebody else. And that's, you know, something she made, which is, you know, a great sign of support that she's always had for me. You know, I always think, like, if there was a job description for a drag queen, it's to do fundraisers and raise money and be ambassadors of goodwill, and that's kind of the take I take on drag. It's my philosophy on it. You know, I use this as my vehicle to do good things. Because I've been doing it for 16, 17 years, and I don't think it's something I'm ever going to stop doing. As long as there's a stage, as long as there's an organization or a charity, I'll be there to help out. It's my way of giving back to the community using this vehicle.
About 10 years ago, there were only a couple kings around, and there was myself, Hector. I started performing at Club Ren as well, just occasionally. And this came from my time in Vancouver when I lived there. Seeing the drag king scene for the first time there really inspired me when I moved back to Kitchener to become a king myself. And I remember seeing my very first drag king in Vancouver. She performed the song Iris by Goo Goo Dolls. And I'll never forget that. It was actually like really powerful. I think it was the first time that I actually saw that I really could be who I want to be. And she started out at the beginning of the song as her everyday self, and as the song goes on, she transforms into her drag king character. And it was so powerful because she was standing with her back to the audience, and just as the chorus of Iris comes, she turns around and faces the audience, and those words are powerful, and I'm moved by them whenever I hear them. I don't want the world to see who I am, because I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to see who I am. I think what's really important about people being able to perform drag is the world isn't really accepting of playing around with gender, and there's actually huge consequences to doing that out in the real world. People get bullied, harassed, and just generally people don't feel safe to even try to express themselves differently than what their gender says they must be. But on stage, in the queer community, this is just so celebrated and so embraced. I can tell you, I have never met, I'm sure, a drag king or a drag queen who hasn't fundraised for some cause. All kings and queens, they fundraise, they raise money because they know how important it is to support the organizations that help, especially our queer youth in our city. So I think the drag culture is so important, and I hope that this is something in our community that never changes.
Tribe Pride has grown from like a little grassroots festival to a regional pride, which is one of the largest in Ontario.
Last year, the festival brought in excess of 8,000 people. Our festival goes now for almost 2 weeks. It's usually 10 events prior to Pride Day. And Pride Day is our big festival feast day. It is a live music festival. We have children's area, we have good food, we have lots of laughter and fun. Vendors market pushing 50 people last year in the vendors market. So it's become a place to be, a place to do. In the first Saturday of June, we kick Pride off in Ontario. Okay, this jacket is actually from about 1968, and it still fits, believe it or not. And a lot of these pins are from that era. This is my Pride jacket. I wear this on Pride Day, no matter where I am. And I do it for fundraisers for Try Pride. I put this on, and it's the only time I wear it. It's almost a religious article for me. So
I know the city had asked them to move off the island downtown because of the noise level. It was growing bigger and bigger, and a lot of the people that lived in that area were complaining about the noise. Not just for this event, other events were asked to move to.
Victoria Island was a beautiful setting. It was wonderful. Our festival, unlike most gay festivals, really promotes family, and I'm very proud of that. And we're known for that across the country. So we really emphasize the family, and in the park it was wonderful. There was grass and trees and ducks and all that kind of stuff. So it was very idyllic. The music was good, the camaraderie was good, the kids had fun in the Childs. So then we moved to King Street, and it's a whole different ballgame. It's grass and trees to concrete and tar. It was very difficult to figure out how to make people feel comfortable. Plus the exposure. You had to know what part of the park it was in and how to get there. So a lot of straight people didn't wander into the park. They'd look at it and they go see the rainbows and go, not for me, or come join us and party. When you get on King Street, there's no getting away from it. Just the flow of people are there. And what I loved this year was the number of straight people that joined and partied with us. They'd ask us what's going on, we'd tell them, they'd say great, and they'd go get a beer, listen to some music, have some food.
Yeah, one thing I never would have imagined one organization would have come so far is the local police force. They were at Pride this past year, and they were giving out rainbow-colored, what do you call those things? Lanards, with always recruiting written right on it. But wonderful, wonderful. Because, you know, growing up, I was probably fully aware that three huge forces in society were against us. Religion, the state, and the law. For religion, we were sinners. For medicine, we were sick, and as far as the law was concerned, we were criminal. And to overcome criminality, being a sin, or being a sinner, and being sick was just seemed daunting. And now you look around and you see the police force handing out rainbow ribbons, doctors openly gay, ministers now openly gay, and performing marriage. We've come a long, long way.
I think it's a really interesting time to be active in this community because I was very involved in the early 2000s, and I've become very involved again with and very engaged with our community in the last couple of years. And it seems to me there was a stretch of time between 2003 and maybe 2010 where it didn't seem like there was a lot going on locally. I saw a lot less going on locally, and now it just seems like there's a resurgence of activism going on in our community recently. I mean, I think about things of there's a protest against the Cambridge marriage officiant who wouldn't perform same-sex unions, citing religion as being the reason why.
So in 2010, a number of people from across the community kind of came together. It was partly in response to an incident that had happened in our community where two girls exchanged a kiss in a cafe and then were kicked out. And there had been sort of a demonstration against that, but no follow-up, no kind of community building or community development activity after that. And so a number of people kind of came together, and I remember I was approached by a member of Try Pride actually, who said, you know what can we do in addition to just having this public demonstration? What more can we do to build our community? So, over the past couple of years, a board of directors, we've come together to try and build this organization, and right now we're working under the name Waterloo Region Rainbow Coalition. We recently opened a Rainbow Community Center, and so that community center is in Uptown Waterloo. And what we're trying to do is not just educational events, but also try and use that space as a place for creating awareness of our community. Another big historical event, which was actually really recent, was the passing of Ontario's bill for the Safe and Accepting Schools bill. And so that was a bill that was meant to address bullying, but it specifically included a clause that would require all schools across the province to offer programming and services for LGBT people, to LGBT students. So specifically, it named gay-straight alliances as one option. And it passed successfully after a very well-supported campaign by Catholic schools to not, accept that bill. And in the end it did pass, and I think that the impact of that we are not going to feel for years, right? Because I think about the support that I got. I went to a Catholic school, actually, and I think about the support that I got from specific teachers and specific parents as well, and the immeasurable positive impact that had on me as a young queer woman. And now I think, wow, that support, that's going to be institutionalized. For this next crop of students and for future generations, that's actually an institutionalized support. To me, that's going to be hugely impactful.
Growing up in Thunder Bay, you would see things on the news every now and then about gay individuals. I remember being 17 years old and hearing about Mark Hall on TV and how, his school board wouldn't let him take his boyfriend to prom. The idea that today we have things like GSA proms and semi-formals blows my mind, because growing up 16, 17 years old in Thunder Bay, that didn't exist. There was no presence. And for me, it's such a huge opportunity now to see how we can better support our youth, what other resources are here to help support them, and how we can make sure that they're going to be the leaders of tomorrow for our community.
An organization that has been absolutely critical in our community is Okay to Be Me. Okay to Be Me is a organization that focuses on creating supports and building capacity for LGBTQ youth in our community. And they have just done fantastic work. I feel so very privileged to be a part of the organization. We have started gay-straight alliances, GSAs, in high schools throughout the region, including Catholic schools, which is a huge step forward. My role right now with them is to help to get GSAs into senior public schools, so grades 7 and 8, as well as elementary schools, K to 6. That's pretty radical. And Waterloo Region is really on the cutting edge of this work, and we should be very proud of what we're doing. The fact that the media has come so far in terms of reflecting our lives in accurate, neutral ways, even sympathetic ways, I think is critical, right? Like, the work we've done to get GSAs into schools could never have happened without the media coverage of, queer youth suicide and bullying. That's been going on forever, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. But I don't know, over time there was a shift, and people started to pay attention, and people started to care, and realize that, the fact that so many young people are killing themselves over homophobia and bullying, maybe we should do something about that. It took a long time, but we're there now, and we're doing the work, and it has gotten better.
Oh, it's definitely a lot easier for youth to connect with others in this present time, but 10 years ago, like being a product of the Catholic education system, there were very limited resources. I often had to speak out for what I believed is right for my own human rights, for my own personal development and growth, and the amount of struggles that a youth can go through can be heartbreaking.
I joined the Rainbow Chorus in 1997 when I moved to Guelph after my partner passed away in Mount Forest, and I was looking for some kind of community. I was feeling quite left out, and it was probably the best decision I made to join the chorus.
Jan's what we call a twit, a tenor with tits. I'm not supposed to
need to go through that. Sorry.
I joined the chorus in 2000. To the best of my knowledge, the Rainbow Chorus is still the only small town gay chorus in Canada.
Okay, as I said, I started with the Rainbow Chorus in 1997, and we've done many outreach programs. We've sung at AIDS vigils. We have done December 6th vigils. There's been. We've sung at memorials and weddings, but I think the most amazing outreach that I've done in the number of years I was with the chorus, we did the Gay Straight Alliance in Waterloo with the Waterloo District School Board. We sang True Colors and How Different, and I can't remember the other song we sang, but it was an amazing experience because we got together with the students and told our stories, and then they told their stories to us, and they're very, very brave kids that will come out. I mean, at 14, 15 years old, it's just amazing because, I mean, for myself, I was well into my 20s before I even admitted it or did anything about it. So for kids that age, and it goes all into this whole bullying thing as well, it was an amazing, amazing experience.
So we're talking about the GSA and what really was the moment that was the most moving, the most powerful, the goose pimple moment of the day. And we were singing True Colors, and we had done a classroom with the kids, and we asked the kids to join us, to come up and sing with us True Colors. And we were linking arms, and it was amazing. It was an amazing moment. It was a moment where one of the young women had said, you know, it gives me hope to see all those gray heads because it means I can live that long as a lesbian. And for us, it was just, you people are so brave. You have such courage. You are so young. You're so positive. You're so strong. We're so proud of you. It was just an amazing, complete moment.
The only fear I have getting older in the community is the isolation that I can see coming. I know two couples who've been split because of nursing homes, and they've gone back in the closet because it's just not cool to be an old gay person. I imagine I don't know for sure, but I imagine there's some abuse involved, and so you're going back in an old total isolation when you're a senior, when you need the support of your family the most. So that's the scary part we have to get to yet. We have to get senior homes gay friendly, or gay positive, not friendly, gay positive. Maybe we need gay nursing homes. Yeah, we need care from cradle to grave. Yes. Like the straight society, we deserve what they have. And we deserve to live as gay people till the day we die.
And so there is a crying need for better and ongoing education around the issue of gender variance.
As well, Waterloo region being traditionally Caucasian, there's a stronger need for services for visible minorities within the rainbow community. I know I've struggled with that as, individual growing up here.
The differences, in the early years were that we had a lot of people really basically survivors, and they had found different ways in their lives to kind of coexist, how their sexuality coexist with who they were and what they were doing, and it brought out some real creativity. You look at artists and writers, and it's basically like a forge in terms of it. It's a great intense energy and emotion and stuff that causes people to be more creative and to reach out more in certain ways in their own lives. And I think that part of it today is probably more blasé for the average young gay person growing up, that they don't have this as intense a struggle. I think in some respects it's even worse, because when I was a kid in school, the word gay didn't exist, and the word fag didn't really exist. Whereas today, it's like, I can hear it every time I drive past the schoolyard.
And I hope that, and I believe that that's what's different nowadays, is when people come out, I don't think that across the board there's as many losses. I do believe people still have losses. I still have friends that are experiencing losses as a result of coming out and being who they are. But I think there's less and less places where your worth as a human being is always measured, and that you're always at risk of loss. So yeah, that's, I think, the biggest thing that for me has changed, is that sense that, you know, you're not necessarily going to lose your family. It was almost a given back then. You're not necessarily going to lose your church. That was an automatic back then. You're not going to get kicked out of the military. You're not going to get kicked out of your housing. You're not going to lose all your friends. That was a given. That you were going to lose. And, you know, and everything that you did would be measured according to, you know, what your identity was. You know, for some reason there seemed to be that whole piece around being painted as a sexual deviant and getting grouped in with people that committed horrible acts on children, and like to be lumped in that category and be looked at in that way was just a violation of my whole sense of being. And so, you know, just that whole separation, that, you know, there's people that have criminal behavior and are abusing people, and then there are the LGBTQ community, and they're not the same. And so just having even that pulled apart was huge. So because even then, like, I mean, if you said you were gay, you had to worry about whether people would have a problem with you being around their children. Like, it was a very difficult time. And it was better than the group that came before me. And that's the part that, if you talk to people that are very, it came out even 10, 20 years before me, it was even more atrocious. One of the neat things about working with the youth was seeing that some of them were able to keep their families, and some of them were able to keep their friends, and some of them were able to join clubs and be with people, and that some of them didn't have all these losses. Some of them still did. And that's why I did the work, because some of them still did. But there was some that didn't. And a part of me was jealous, and a part of me was so happy, because they didn't have to go through that, because that wounds you.
I think that another important aspect of our history that I think not everybody wants to revisit is that previous to all of the rights organizing and the successes that we've seen over the past 50 years, our community was routinely targeted by police, by government, by medical institutions, and it's important for us to remember that was really only 50 years ago.
And so the change today is like it's like in some respects a totally different world. But then, you know, I heard even just yesterday about stuff that's happening in Jamaica and whatever, and I realized, you know, we're so lucky to be ahead, and we've got to hold on to it, because there's been advances in the past. You know, back even in the 20s and 30s, where it was movements and stuff, and they were just crushed in a huge way at various points, even in the United States and in other parts of the world, and in Germany. And we have to be totally vigilant all the time, because you just have to look at what's happening in Uganda and that kind of thing to understand that it's a thin line there. And you can't ever take it for granted every step of the way. You've got to be vigilant and in the face of the powers that be to, you know, stand up for your rights. Otherwise, they will take them away. They've done it before.
I got very active in the gay community soon after I met Wayne, because being madly in love, we went to Hamilton and got a little bit tipsy and drunk, and we're kissing on King Street in Hamilton, and we both got punched out. Lost consciousness, broken tooth, glasses smashed, and I thought, I don't want to live in that kind of a world where my love is denied. So I became very, very active any way I could. I joined organizations, thought about print media, radio media, lobbying city council to making sure we got more rights, more respect, the whole works. There was no holding back at that point, because I was so injured by that incident that I want to change the world. And I think often some people are afraid of activism and they poo-poo politics because they say, well, politics, they're all lies and it's very slow and very cumbersome. And it certainly is. But, you know, from when I was born, I could have had lobotomy or been locked up in an insane asylum. And today we can get married. And that all came about through politics. Slow, steady politics, boring politics, but don't give up on it.
It's just like my grandparents, you know, they saw the development of the plane and the TV, and I saw the development of a world that was more accepting of lesbians and gays, and now what's next, you know? Are we really going to move forward and feel good about letting people be who they are? I hope so.
LGBT people, we're sort of immigrants in our own land, and what I mean by that is we need to have our history taught to us. We don't learn it elsewhere, right? Unlike sort of the majority of society. And so without knowing that history, it kind of perpetuates that sense of alienation and that exclusion from society that we experience. That's one part of it. And I think the other reason why it's important for us to learn our own history is that it helps us to build community. We get a sense of who we are.
Yeah, thinking about why this is important to remember our history, and I was thinking about, well, I should get some photos together, and I think, I don't know that I have any photos of us back then, because if you hauled out a camera at an event, I think a lot of people would scatter, that they didn't want somehow their picture to come out that they were at a gay event. Not like it is now, where you've got camera phones everywhere and it's no big deal. But back then, so you felt that something, a photo of you, gay identified, could be used against you at some point, fall in the wrong hands. So that's kind of why it's important to talk about it, because we don't have a lot of history on paper, aside from the publications that we've done. We have to rely on, I guess, a lot of oral history. You know, people weren't in the clubs taking pictures in the clubs. They weren't taking pictures of the doors. They weren't taking pictures of people standing around, because you just didn't document that sort of thing. So it's a shame, really, but...
I'm Métis, and I learned from a very early age that my people were, I had two histories being told to me. One by my grandfather telling me I was to be very proud of my people, and one from the school books that taught me my people were lesser and that they were traitors. And that I learned the lesson really early on, that the victor, the dominant culture, tells the story of history. And lesbians, gays, bisexuals, trans people, queer people, we aren't the victor. We're not the dominant culture in the society. So we have to have, our stories don't get told. And this film, the archives, the Rainbow website, the community center, all of these things are important ways that our history is told and that we don't lose it.
I think one thing queer youth need to keep in mind is the luxuries they have that we did not have as kids. In the 60s, as I've said a few times, it was illegal to be gay. There was no organizations of any kind to go to for support. There was nothing. Now in Kitchener-Waterloo, we have Tri-Pride, and we also have the Waterloo Regional Rainbow Coalition. Phenomenal. We have a presence, a physical building where you can go and talk to somebody in an office. That's, to me, phenomenal. Again, something I never thought I would see in KW. A lot of really hard-working gay people in this community have made a lot of things happen. And I'm proud to be friends with those guys. It's the Tom Ryans and the Shelley Secrets of the world are wonderful people. So, and their love of life and their enthusiasm spills to everybody else, and everybody just gets uplifted, and we have a gay community that I'm proud to be part of.
I think collecting our history and documenting it, I think, is really critical for the younger generation. to have a sense of identity over time, having a sense of remarkable men, women, transgendered folk that have made a significant difference and have been successful and respected and published and that cared, and that they can become involved and they can be all this as well, and that there is a place, that it's not just an orientation or a gender, it's a community.
The other thing I think kids need to remember is that pride is born from civil disobedience. If things are not right, you need to stand up and say, hey, no more shit, as Toronto would say. Enough is enough. We deserve everything we have. We deserve respect, we deserve love, and we deserve a place of our own in our Canada.
And I think it's a source of strength for us, especially when we're young, to know where we come from, to know that we are resilient people, to know that we have a strong history of being able to fight and to win, to succeed. You know, I think that that's really an important piece, especially when you're feeling discriminated against, especially when you're feeling oppressed, especially when you're feeling marginalized, to know that the women who have come before you, they faced this and they won, and that you were a part of that, you were a piece of that you can do it yourself, and that, you know, we are. And this is where my brain just starts singing We Are the World, and it's bad.
I declare a social war. 5, 6, 7, 8. No hate. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is what we're fighting for. 5, 6, 7, 8. No hate.
A lot of firsts have happened in Waterloo region, and it's important to showcase that to the rest of Canada.
And so there's really something for everybody here now in our community. And I love that with Kitchener-Waterloo. It's just that there's so much for our community to get involved in. All you have to do is reach out to it.
I feel very fortunate to have grown up in Waterloo region, and I'm really thankful for all the people who have worked over the last few decades to make this city what it is. And really, the work that we're doing now matters for all the youth who are going to grow up in our city.
There's a lot going on in our community right now. It is a happening place to be if you're LGBTQ. Like, I'm so excited to be living here and to be living in this time and to be involved in this community now, because things are growing and thriving, and I can't wait to see what happens next.